The peaceful evening at the Rivers household was just about to begin. The golden light of the setting sun streamed through the windows, casting a warm, tranquil glow over the living room. The house was as quiet as ever. Emma was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, as she always did. Her husband James would be home soon from work. Their son, Ethan, now 20 years old, sat at the dining table, scrolling through his phone. Emma could still vividly remember his childhood, the first steps he took, the first words he spoke. But now, before her, was a tall and broad-shouldered young man, someone she found herself understanding less and less as the years passed. As she turned to set the table, she noticed Ethan's gaze lingering on her longer than usual. It was subtle, yet something about it unsettled her. His eyes seemed fixed on the space between her shoulders and her collarbone, making her heart skip for a second before she shook the thought away. After dinner, as was their routine, they sat together in the living room watching a movie. James was still not home. These quiet nights brought Emma a sense of comfort, a feeling of family unity. Yet, as she sat next to Ethan, she couldn't shake the memory of how he had looked at her earlier. It had been so fleeting, so easy to dismiss, but her mind refused to let go of it. The warm glow of the lamp, the softness of the couch, the peacefulness of the film playing on the screen, it was all so familiar, yet suddenly, something felt different. She wasn't sure when it happened, but she realized she no longer saw Ethan as just her little boy. He had grown into a man, and that thought alone made her uneasy. As the movie played on, Ethan shifted slightly closer to her, almost imperceptibly. His hand, resting on the couch, lightly brushed against hers. Emma felt an unexpected rush of warmth spread through her. It was so sudden, so startling, that she pulled her hand away as if burned. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stood abruptly. "I think I need some water," she said hastily, making her way into the kitchen. Ethan remained on the couch, watching her go. His voice, calm yet tinged with curiosity, followed her. "Are you okay, Mom?" "Yes, I'm fine," she replied, forcing a laugh. "Just tired." When she returned, she sat on the far end of the couch, trying to steady herself. The movie continued, but the silence between them grew. Her thoughts swirled in chaos. What was happening? Why did she react that way? This was her son, her Ethan, the child she had raised and poured her heart into. And yet, something inside her felt like it had shifted in a way she couldn't comprehend. 15 minutes later, Emma stood again. "I think I'll go to bed now," she announced, her voice shaking just slightly. "You can finish the movie without me." She attempted a smile, but her nerves betrayed her. As she lay in bed, her thoughts refused to quiet. What was that feeling? Was she imagining things? She told herself it was just exhaustion, that she was overthinking. Yet the more she dwelled on it, the more it unsettled her. She had crossed an invisible line in her mind, one she never intended to approach. The next morning, she woke as usual, but something felt different. As she walked into the kitchen, she saw Ethan sitting at the table, sipping coffee. In front of him sat a plate of breakfast. Another plate, hers, was across from him, prepared just the way she liked. Emma hesitated. "You surprised me," she said with a smile, though inside something trembled. Ethan looked up at her, his expression unreadable. You always make breakfast for me. I thought I'd return the favor today. She sat down slowly, her legs feeling unsteady, her hands wrapped around the cup, desperate for something solid to hold onto. Her heart pounded as she realized the truth. She had let herself get caught up in a moment, and now she couldn't stop thinking about it. She had to find a way to move past it, to forget, but no matter how hard she tried, she knew that morning was just the beginning of the thoughts that would haunt her from now on. Maybe it really had just been my imagination running wild. I debated whether to ask the question lingering in my mind or to simply push through my own thoughts. His presence, his closeness, it was as if he was the solid ground I reached for in moments of uncertainty. This is my son, after all. I took a deep breath and made up my mind. "Ethan, could you help me with something today?" I asked, trying to make my voice sound as natural as possible. "Sure, Mom," he answered readily as if nothing unusual had happened. I wasn't entirely sure why I had even asked him. Maybe I just needed a distraction, something to pull me away from the tangled thoughts in my mind and restore a sense of normalcy. Damn it, he's my son. Calm down. Enough is enough, I kept telling myself. It's fine. We're just going on a little road trip. An hour later, we were driving down the open road in our pickup truck. The weather was perfect, the air crisp, the sky an endless blue. Everything felt peaceful, and I found myself ashamed of the intrusive thoughts that had plagued me the night before. We chatted about his college parties, his new friends, and the responsibilities of adulthood. It was an easy conversation, one that made me smile with pride. He had grown so much, and what a joy it was to hear him talk so animatedly about his life. Laughter filled the car, carrying away any lingering unease. Suddenly, Ethan's voice broke through our chatter. "Stop! Stop, Mom! Let's pull over here!" he shouted, his excitement bursting through. I laughed at his enthusiasm. All right, just don't yell like that," I teased as I pulled the truck to a stop. We stepped out into the serene beauty of the forest. The silence was almost sacred, the trees towering over us like ancient guardians. The clean, fresh air filled my lungs, and for a moment I felt at peace. I closed my eyes, soaking in the tranquility, allowing it to wash over me like a cleansing wave. Then, without warning, Ethan stepped closer. Too close. Startled, I opened my eyes and looked up at him. His face was inches from mine, his expression unreadable. There was something in his eyes, something unfamiliar, something that made my stomach tighten. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice carrying an emotion I couldn't quite place. "You know how important you are to me, don't you?" Goosebumps prickled my skin. Something about his gaze, about the way his words lingered in the air, made my breath hitch. A forbidden, unspoken sensation crept through me, unwelcome yet impossible to ignore. I tried to keep my voice steady, to maintain my composure. "Of course, darling," I said, forcing a calm smile. "You're my son and you mean the world to me." I took a step back, needing space, needing distance, but Ethan didn't move. Instead, he reached for my hand, his grip tightening with an intensity that sent a shiver through me. "I love you so much, Mom," he whispered, his voice carrying a weight that unsettled me. "You're the most important person in my life." A tear slipped down my cheek before I even realized it. His words, they should have been comforting, but instead they felt charged, as if they held a deeper meaning I couldn't grasp. It was overwhelming, thrilling even, yet completely and utterly wrong. "Yes," I murmured, my voice trembling. "I love you too." Ethan's gaze darkened, his eyes locked onto mine with a cold intensity. My body tensed, every nerve in me on edge. "Are you afraid?" he asked, his voice barely audible, yet each word struck me like a hammer. I hesitated. The answer should have been simple, yet it wasn't. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I don't know," I admitted, my voice nothing more than a whisper. I wanted to tell him that this feeling, this strange shift between us, was a wall that couldn't be crossed, that shouldn't be crossed, but the words wouldn't come. Ethan's expression flickered. Hesitation, confusion, something unrecognizable flashing across his face, and then silence. A heavy silence, thick with everything we weren't saying. "It's not supposed to be like this," I whispered finally, searching desperately for the right words. Words that wouldn't hurt him, words that wouldn't shatter whatever this moment had become. But the truth was, I didn't know how to fix this. I didn't even know how we had gotten here. "I'm not afraid or embarrassed. I'm just telling the truth. It can't be any other way. I feel it," Ethan said, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of something inevitable, almost tragic. "Please, let's keep going." "I can't," I whispered, trying to stay calm even though everything inside me was screaming. My emotions were like two fragile strings stretched to their limit, ready to snap. I knew he was struggling, that he was confused about his feelings, that he needed guidance. Words flooded my mind at an overwhelming speed, but none of them seemed right. I didn't want to hurt him, but I couldn't let this go any further either. "Ethan," I finally managed, my voice thick with emotion, "I love you, but as a son. I can't let us destroy what we have, our pure love. It's sacred. Please understand." I saw his face change, shifting through frustration, pain, and perhaps the beginnings of understanding. He lowered his head, the way a child does when being told that something they desperately want is out of reach, something they can't simply take. In that moment, he looked as young as he had when I scolded him for leaving his toys scattered across the floor. A sharp pain shot through my chest. How had we come to this? "Ethan," I wanted to say more, but the words refused to come. Instead, I led him to the car and we got in without another word. The drive home was long, much longer than usual. We were silent, both lost in our thoughts. We drove for 15, maybe 20 minutes, but it felt as if time had stopped altogether. There was no point in continuing to our original destination. My friend's house no longer mattered. Nothing did except getting home, getting back to some semblance of normalcy, if that was even possible. When we finally pulled into the driveway, Ethan bolted from the car before I had even turned off the engine. He disappeared inside, his door slamming shut behind him. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, feeling a wave of frustration, sadness, and guilt crash over me. How had this happened? How had we ended up here? I had always tried to be the best mother I could be. I had given him all my love, supported him in everything. I had raised him to be strong, brave, independent, not a child forever clinging to his mother. I poured my soul, my warmth, everything I had into him, sometimes forgetting that I too was human, that I wasn't a machine built only to give, but a woman who needed care and support as well. And now everything was falling apart. It hurt. It hurt in a way I couldn't even begin to describe. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I tried to approach him, to distract him with small tasks around the house, to offer my help, to talk, but every time he pulled away. He refused to meet my gaze, avoided my presence entirely. By the time night fell, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, a crushing guilt settling over me. I had only wanted his happiness, but instead I had hurt him, destroyed something inside him. How could I have done that? How had I ruined his world, his feelings? The silence of the house was heavy, suffocating. Then, suddenly, a quiet knock at the door. My breath caught in my throat. It was him. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that he wouldn't knock again, that he would turn away, that he wouldn't break this fragile quiet between us. I wanted to pretend to be asleep. I wanted to tell him not to come in, but I knew that would only hurt him more, and so, reluctantly, I beckoned him inside. He stood in the doorway, hesitant, lingering on the threshold. Then slowly he stepped forward. I instinctively pulled the blanket up over myself, as if it could somehow shield me from whatever was coming next. Ethan stopped a few feet from the bed, staring at me, silent. The weight of his gaze pressed down on me, unspoken words thick in the air. The moment stretched endlessly before he finally moved, lowering himself onto the edge of the bed beside me. "Mom, I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. It was raw, filled with bitterness, regret, something broken. I swallowed hard but said nothing. "I was wrong to tell you that tonight," he continued, his fingers curling into fists in his lap. But I couldn't hold it in anymore. That pain, that feeling, it's been tearing me apart from the inside out. His confession was like a knife to my heart. I could feel the depth of his suffering, the confusion, the turmoil, and yet I had no answers, no perfect words to make it all go away. "Ethan," I whispered, reaching out but hesitating just before my hand met his. For a moment we just sat there, frozen in a moment neither of us knew how to fix. I stared at him, shaking my head slowly, unable to say a word. I was terrified of making things worse, of saying something that would push him further away. My thoughts were a tangled mess. How long had he felt this way? How had we ended up here? At the same time, I could see the pain in his eyes, the torment that confused not just him, but me as well. It was tearing me apart from the inside out. Under the blanket, I clenched my fists, desperate to find the right words, something that could make this better, but nothing came. Instead, I reached for him, pulling him into a tight embrace. My heart pounded, gripped by fear and guilt. I held him as if letting go would mean losing him forever, as if my arms alone could keep him from slipping away. In that moment, I realized my fear of losing him was far greater than I had ever imagined. I grasped his hand, clinging to it like a lifeline, hoping it could somehow protect us from everything that had already happened and everything still to come. We sat in silence, the world around us frozen, time stretching endlessly. Then, slowly, he rose, as if carrying an unbearable weight. Without a word, he turned and walked to his room. I didn't try to stop him. It felt as though if I let go of his hand, I would never be able to hold on to him again, and yet he left anyway. The next morning, I found him downstairs, sitting on the couch, his elbows resting on his knees. His face was filled with sadness, so familiar yet strangely distant. He looked at me, but the warmth that had always been in his gaze was gone. "I'm leaving," he said, softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Each word struck me like a blow to the chest. "I packed all my things. I'll be living nearby," he added, his tone flat, devoid of accusation or anger. It was simply a statement of fact. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. The pain was suffocating, an unbearable ache that refused to release me. It felt as if something inside of me had cracked, leaving only emptiness in its place. I opened my mouth, desperate to say something, to stop him, to make him stay, but the words wouldn't come. Everything I felt, misunderstanding, regret, sorrow, rushed forward, but I was paralyzed, unable to speak. He let out a quiet, hollow laugh. I didn't stop him. I didn't even move. Only when the door closed behind him did I truly understand. That moment, that day, it had changed everything. I never imagined I would share this, but here I am, finding the courage to confess the most secret, forbidden, and complicated night of my life. That day, the day everything changed, I thought it would just be about not spending my 52nd birthday alone, but there was so much more behind Daniel's desire not to leave me by myself. The pull between us, those forbidden emotions, and everything we had suppressed for years could never truly be ignored. And that day was when all of it finally came to a head. Let me start from the beginning. Daniel was my late husband, Richard's godson. Now at 30, he was confident, determined, and had a presence that captivated me instantly. After Richard passed away, Daniel used to visit often, sometimes staying with me for days. But then, 2 years ago, he disappeared without a word. During his absence, the moments we shared remained locked away in the deepest corners of my mind. I tried to forget him, to push those memories aside, but I couldn't. And then, that day arrived. He appeared at my doorstep. He claimed he needed to search for some old documents in the attic, but I knew immediately that wasn't the only reason he had come. Daniel's gaze, it was the same as before, filled with unspoken emotions, stirring everything I had buried deep within myself. When he smiled at me, holding a few papers in his hand, I realized there was more to his visit. And I was right. The record player he had placed in the attic, the one I had always wanted even when Richard was alive, sat there with my favorite vinyl on it. The documents were just an excuse. This was about me. The moment I saw that record player, my heart felt like it would burst from my chest. Later, Daniel left without saying much, but that evening he returned, a cake in his hand. That familiar smile was still there, but now it held something deeper. "I didn't want you to spend your 52nd birthday alone, Sylvia," he said, and I realized then that this was about so much more than a birthday celebration. Daniel was about to give me a night I never could have imagined. That night, everything changed. When I opened the door and saw Daniel standing there, I was completely unprepared for what I saw. This wasn't just a casual visit. I could feel it instantly. He was holding a delicate cake and dressed in a sharp suit. The smile on his face was different, more meaningful, more intense. At 30, Daniel carried a maturity that blended with the energy of his youth, making him impossibly captivating. "Happy birthday, Sylvia," he said, his voice warm enough to fill the entire doorway. His words both surprised me and stirred something indescribable in my chest. He had remembered my birthday. For the first time in years, someone had come to celebrate it with such care. "I didn't want you to spend it alone," he added, his enchanting smile growing. "Tonight should be special." I wanted to say something, but the words caught in my throat. Daniel placed the cake on the coffee table and stepped closer to me. "But Sylvia," he said, his eyes scanning me gently, "tonight could be so much more special. Let's celebrate it properly, in a way you deserve. Go put on a nice dress and let's make this a night to remember." At first I considered refusing, but the gentle insistence in Daniel's gaze made it impossible. I nodded slightly and walked upstairs. As I ascended, a strange excitement coursed through me, sending a warmth through my chest. When I opened my wardrobe, my eyes landed on the black dress I hadn't worn in years. I ran my fingers over the soft fabric before stepping toward the mirror. Before putting on the dress, I slipped off my t-shirt, standing bare before my reflection. My skin remained firm, my figure still graceful despite the years. I traced my waist with my hands, leaned forward slightly, and studied my shoulders. "I'm still captivating," I murmured to myself. At 52, I had somehow defied time. Smiling softly, I slid into the dress, feeling genuinely special in that moment. As I descended the stairs, a familiar melody floated through the air, reaching my ears from the living room. My steps slowed, my heart quickened. How did Daniel know? I had never mentioned it to him. Confused yet intrigued, I made my way toward the source of the music. There, in the middle of the room, Daniel had set up the record player, carefully selecting a vinyl that I adored. When he saw me, his eyes lit up. The admiration in his expression was undeniable, even though he said nothing at first. "How did you know?" I asked, unable to hide my surprise. Daniel smiled softly, his gaze unwavering. "I listened to you, Sylvia," he said. "You probably thought you were always the one listening to me, but in truth, I was listening to you, every detail, every passion you shared. I remembered it all." His words filled me with warmth. It had been so long since I had felt truly seen, truly heard. Daniel stepped closer, extending his hand toward me. "Let tonight be about you, Sylvia. I'm here to make you feel special." As the melody enveloped the room, I couldn't deny the depth and sincerity in his eyes. We sat down, and though it began as simple conversation, something deeper wove between our words. It was laced with emotions we had long suppressed, a connection neither of us could ignore. The pull between us grew stronger with each passing second. Daniel's voice broke through the quiet air, deep and full of emotion. Do you know why I didn't come back before now, Sylvia? His question caught me off guard. My eyes locked onto his emerald gaze, searching for meaning. He hesitated for a moment, carefully selecting his words. I've always been drawn to you, he finally admitted, his voice soft yet powerful enough to fill the room. I saw the desire, the passion, the excitement inside you. I always saw it. But what I felt scared me, Sylvia. I knew I couldn't bear being around you. My body wanted to run to you, but my mind kept telling me it was wrong.